Reporting from Arkham Asylum, this is Gotham Rogues. In this video we count down the 5 greatest Scarecrow stories ever told. Really good Scarecrow stories are actually pretty hard to come by, but don't think it's because he's a bad character. Oh no, Professor Jonathan Crane is a great villain with a lot of potential. However, sadly, most writers don't seem to be able to bring out the best of him. One common problem is that he's not portrayed as scary enough, and instead just comes off as goofy. Another is that Scarecrow is often just used as a plot device that forces the heroes to face and conquer their worst fears. Such stories can be great, but they don't really explore Jonathan Crane. However, not to fear, there are a few good Scarecrow tales out there, and on this list, I present to you the 5 very best ones. Number 5. The Sinister Straws of the Scarecrow. A one-shot story published in Batman issue number 296 in 1977, written by David V. Reed and penciled by Sal Amendola. In the story, Crane uses his fear toxin to force other criminals to return stolen loot from old heists, but along the way, Scarecrow will be waiting to intercept it. The plot itself is very simple and not too interesting, but what's so appealing about this comic is the portrayal of the Scarecrow. Like I said earlier, Scarecrow is supposed to be scary. I mean, he has scare in his name, for Christ's sake. In Sinister Straws of the Scarecrow, both the writer and the artist pretty much nails the creepiness of Crane. He's a cold, sadistic man who almost comes off as inhuman, something which is enhanced by the fact that we only ever see him without his mask for one single panel. Crane also has these freaky-looking henchmen he calls strawmen, who are a pair of old students of his from his days as a professor at Gotham's University. Crane treats them horribly, using the 2 young men as guinea pigs in his fair experiments. I also have to mention that this comic features, to my knowledge at least, the very first appearance of Scarecrow's fear toxin. Sure, he had used toxins before, such as one that made everyone terrified of Batman, including the Dark Knight himself, but this story is the first where Crane uses a gas that creates hallucinations of your own worst nightmares. Number 4. Cycle of Violence. A 6-part story published in the short-lived title Batman the Dark Knight in 2012, written by Greg Hurwitz and penciled by David Finch. It's a complete retelling of Scarecrow's origin for the New 52 continuity. In the story, we're introduced to a far more deranged Crane than what we are used to, who's even stitched his mouth together for that definitive Scarecrow look. You can't say he's not dedicated. Crane's latest plot involves the kidnapping of children and using them in his fear experiments. He exposes the kids to horrifying toxin-induced hallucinations and then proceeds to collect and analyze the data. With these new discoveries, Crane is going to create a super fear toxin and then drench the entire city with it. While all of this is going on, we also get flashbacks to Jonathan's own childhood, and the reasons for his insanity is revealed. When Jonathan was a child, he lived alone with his father, who was a fanatic and mentally disturbed scientist. The father was obsessed with fear and used his own son as a guinea pig in cruel experiments, with the goal to create a weaponized fear drug. The father reasoned that children were more susceptible to fear, making them easier to reach results with. And now, all grown up, Jonathan is doing exactly the same thing. He's become his father, and he's subjecting his captured children to the same horrors that he was exposed to as a child. Hence the title, Cycle of Violence. There's been plenty of Scarecrow origin stories in the past, but none of them have really nailed it, in my opinion. While this one isn't perfect and has its flaws, I still think Cycle of Violence features the most believable portrayal of Crane's journey into becoming the master of fear. So traumatized was he at the hands of his father that there was nothing else he could do but continue the very same brand of terror. Number 3. Fear for Sale. a one-shot originally published in Detective Comics number 571 in 1986, written by Mike W. Barr and penciled by Alan Davis. The plot revolves around a new toxin the Scarecrow has created, and the twist is that it removes a person's fears. That may sound stupid, because why would that be a bad thing? Well, if you really think about it, fear is one of our most important emotions. It warns us when something could be dangerous and keeps us from doing stupid and reckless things. So what happens when you remove a person's fear, like Crane's new drug does? That person becomes stupid and reckless. Crane has given this toxin to various people, including a race car driver, and then offers to sell them the antidote for a hefty sum of money. However, Scarecrow didn't account for the fact that since they're without fear, they don't care about getting any antidote and simply refuses to comply. Naturally, Batman and Robin are on the case. However, the Boy Wonder gets captured by Crane, and the Dark Knight gets exposed to the drug. It's now up to Batman to fight off his recklessness if he wants to stay alive so that he can save the life of his trusty sidekick. Just like the first story on this list, this one doesn't really explore Crane, but it characterizes him in an interesting way. It's a very manic Scarecrow in this comic, who doesn't even seem to care that his plan to sell the antidote is failing. He appears to actually enjoy it and revels in the madness he's causing. Number 2. Fear of Faith. Written by Devin Grayson and penciled by Dale Eaglesham, this is a 4-part story published in 1999 as a part of the massive crossover arc No Man's Land. For those who aren't familiar with No Man's Land, I'll explain briefly. After Gotham City was struck by a devastating earthquake, the destruction was deemed to be too high, so the US government sealed off the city and abandoned it, declaring Gotham a no man's land. Before that though, the citizens were given a limited amount of time to leave the city, but those who stayed after the walls closed up on Gotham were left to fend for themselves. A tribal society developed within the no man's land where battles for territory, food, and supplies determined who survived and who perished. During this time, Crane took shelter in a church run by Father Chris. Father Chris is an extreme idealist who takes in anyone who needs help but refuses to accept protection from Gordon and his cops, known as the Blue Boys in the No Man's Land. The priest wants no part of the territory system or any affiliation with a so-called gang, as he welcomes everyone. Crane sees this as a prime opportunity to stir up some fear and paranoia within the small community of Father Chris's and starts to turn people against each other. When the church begins to run out of food and medical supplies, Crane manages to influence Father Chris into asking the Penguin for help. Cobblepot, who's the biggest gang leader in the No Man's Land, agrees to provide the church with food and medicine if Father Chris lets Penguin hide a weapons arsenal in the shelter's basement. Without any other options, the priest reluctantly accepts. However, now he's only fed the Scarecrow's plot to destroy the shelter from the inside out. It's a fascinating story which features a perfect interpretation of Jonathan Crane that proves that he doesn't need his toxins to be an effective threat. The entire reason for his scheme is to observe and analyze how the community reacts. He's not out to hurt these people because he hates them, it's simply an experiment. I don't think you can portray Crane in a more frightening way, a cold scientist who plays out his theories about psychology and fear with real people in the real world. To think that he causes all this misery simply to prove a point. And now, for the greatest Scarecrow story ever told. Number 1. Mistress of Fear. A one-shot special published as one of 8 New Year's Evil issues in 1997, each one focusing on a specific DC villain. Mistress of Fear was written by Peter Milligan and penciled by Duncan Fegredo. In the story, Scarecrow terrorizes a calm little suburban neighborhood in Gotham called Greenvale. He actually gets away with it, as no witness is brave enough to defy the Scarecrow and stand trial, or so it seems. Eventually, one Greenvale resident stands up against the Master of Fear and fingers him as the architect of their nightmarish experience, and she is university student Becky Albright. Crane is sent to Arkham, where the other inmates make fun of his defeat at the hands of a young student. Jonathan vows to get revenge and reclaim his pride. After escaping Arkham, he sets his plan in motion and begins to terrorize and stalk Becky in an attempt to destroy her. But instead, he learns just how similar they are. Becky is the subject of relentless bullying at her school, just like Jonathan was years ago. Crane then decides that he's going to bring her down to his level and help Becky get revenge on her tormentors by making her his sidekick. This is a very fun story, and one of few where Crane is the actual protagonist. Despite being evil, Crane is humanized by this story, which forces us to see things through his eyes. He's been hurt bad by the world, and he's simply striking back. We kind of understand and sympathize with his wicked way of thinking, even though we shouldn't. And no other Scarecrow story has been able to achieve that, in my opinion. So there you have it. Those are the 5 greatest Scarecrow stories ever told. If you can think of any others that deserve to be mentioned, write them in the comments below. And remember, Arkham Asylum awaits you in the next video.